Okay, so we'll move on to item number 5, school safety survey data. Deputy Superintendent Patty Norman.
Vice Chair Cummins, I think she might be in another meeting. I think we can go straight to Christy Walker.
Okay, Christy Walker, Safe and Healthy Schools Coordinator.
Sky Hansen.
See that she's a presenter. Christy, is your mic on?
Oh, there we go. I was just sitting here talking to myself. Thank you. So yes, can you hear me okay now?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So today, the school safety survey data will be presented by David Christensen, our school safety data analyst. His position came about through House Bill 120 in 2019. He's a member of the School Safety Center. This survey has been conducted now for 2 years to building administrators to cover several school safety topics to see what implementation and current practices look like at the building level. And so today we'll be focusing on responses related to the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll also be looking at SEL, threat assessment, school resource officers, and multidisciplinary teaming as that pertains to the work of the board. And at this time, I'll turn the rest of the presentation over to David.
Thank you, Christy. And I know Christy and Deputy Superintendent Norman, I appreciate their continued support and help on this project. I look forward to sharing some of the information from this survey with the board members today. And with your permission, Vice Chair Cummins, I will continue. If you can hear me fine.
Yes, thank you.
I plan on presenting for the next 15 minutes or less, and then allow for 5 minutes of Q&A if we have any time afterwards. We can go to the next slide, Jeff. Sorry, I'm having a problem with my slide deck here. So we conducted the survey in the last 3 weeks of May to all building administrators, principals, directors. All 41 districts participated, as well as 114 charters. In all, 478 completed the survey. However, about 100 more respondents started the survey but did not complete it. I have included, however, this incomplete data with the full results. So some of the slides you might see that there's a total count of respondents of more than the 478, up to I think 566 on certain slides. Next slide, please, Jeff. So I'm breaking out the presentation into 4 sections. The primary focus of this presentation, as Christy mentioned, will be on this first section, which is the pandemic in schools. Then we'll go to the next 3 shorter sections on threat assessment, on school resource officer, and then finally finishing up with SEL, social emotional learning. So let's go to the next slide, Jeff. Let's go now to pandemic in schools. To the next slide, please, Jeff. So this first question, based on your observations, what risk factors have increased as a result of COVID-19 pandemic? We asked the respondents to select all that apply. 454 did respond. It's a little bit of an eye chart here, I recognize. So this next slide, I've zeroed in on the top 6 factors. If you go to the next slide, please, Jeff. You'll note here that for these 6 factors, at least 7 out of every 10 respondents selected these factors. The top 4 dealing with mental health. anxiety, stress, social isolation, and depression, and then rounding out with financial stress and unsupervised screen time. Next slide, please, Jeff. Our next question asked, how adequately prepared do you feel your school is in providing services to students following the COVID-19 pandemic? So almost 2/3 of respondents felt that their school is somewhat adequate in providing services to students following the pandemic. Then if you add extremely adequate, more than 3/4 of the respondents felt that their school is somewhat adequate or extremely adequate in providing services to the students. Now, if we go to the next slide, we break out the answers to this question and look at it on a charter and district level. We can see this breakdown here on this next slide. So the bars represent the number of respondents, hence the low bars on the charter side of the slide to the left and the higher bars in the district side of the chart to the right. The line represents the percent of respondents. So while the previous slide was a snapshot or a top level, state level shot a view, we were able to break out the responses by charter schools and district schools as shown here. What we found interesting here is that the trend on the previous slide remained constant on the slide, even when you break it out this way. The somewhat adequate response remained constant at over 60% when you break out the two segments, with charter at 63 and district at 69%. The other responses under charter and district, while they may not line up in the same order, they all fall under 10% of the total responses for their given segment. Let's take a look at the next question about concerns regarding student reentry. So we asked, select your area of greatest concern regarding student reentry following the COVID-19 pandemic. And according to the building administrators, academic delays scored highest, followed by student mental health. And those two choices make up more than 2/3 of all responses from the 460 respondents. Let's take a look now at how these numbers break down when we break them out by charter and district, and further by city and rural areas on this next slide. So once again, the pinkish bars represent the number of respondents in each of the sections. The lines and percentage boxes represent the percentage of the respondents who chose that concern. The left portion of the slide again represents charter schools and further breaks out the response by locales, city and rural. In a similar fashion, we've broken out the district section on the right of the slide and further broke out that section by city and rural. As you can see, the school administrators from different LEA types, different locales, chose academic delays and student mental health as the top two concerns for their students' reentry. Let's now move to the final slide of this section, which refers to crisis response protocol. We asked, my school would benefit, or rather, we stated my school would benefit from information in the following areas of crisis response protocol. Select all that apply. More than 50% chose best practices. And this wasn't much of a surprise to me. Like less than a year ago, I saw a school safety survey done by the governor's office, and there was a similar question. And the overwhelming response was a desire for best practices to be shared with all schools. So let's now transition to the threat assessment section of the presentation. Jeff, if you go to the two slides. So we asked, one more slide, Jeff, please, sorry. We asked their response to the following statement. My school uses a multidisciplinary team to discuss supports and interventions for students who are struggling. 2/3 of the responses were yes, that they are using a multidisciplinary team for students struggling. And when you add the response yes, but needs improvement, we see that 94% of all respondents are using a multidisciplinary team, with almost 460 responding to this question. On the next slide, we asked, my school uses a multidisciplinary team to identify, assess, and intervene with possible threats at the school. So 54% responded yes, 30% said yes, but needs improvement. So 84% of these respondents are using multidisciplinary teams for possible school threats. We anticipate both of these numbers to go up now that you as a board have approved CSTAG, the Comprehensive School Threat Assessment Guideline, as the model threat assessment. The last slide in this section asks about MTSS, or multi-tiered systems of support. So we asked, or we stated, my school uses a multi-tiered system of supports to implement interventions based on the level of a student's identified behavioral needs. Again, over 50% of the respondents checked yes, and 37% said yes, but needs improvement. So based on these data, 90% of respondents are using MTSS to implement interventions based on students' needs. So we'll now transition to the next section, which is the school resource officer. And in this first slide, it asks how frequently law enforcement officers involved in the resolution of school safety incidents. Now in this slide, I've broken it out into 2019 and 2020 because we had the same question asked last year, which was the first year we did the school safety survey. 2019 is on the left, 2020 is on the right. Compared to last year as a percentage, the almost always segment doubled from almost 20% to almost 40%. And we're also seeing a trend in 2020 showing more collaboration with law enforcement. Let's now turn a little, let's break it down a little further now into this next slide. As we did in previous slides, we've broken out the data from the previous slide by district and charter and by year. The left side representing 2019, broken out by district and charter, and the right side representing 2020 by district and charter. And as you can see in 2019, there's really no real trends broken out this way. But as we look at 2020, you see similar trends in districts and charters. We'd like to see the blue and the green bars lead out, obviously, but we think the data is trending in a good direction. We do believe, as we see this chart and as we talk with our school administrators and law enforcement personnel, collaboration is happening more frequently in our schools. We'll now move to the final slide of this SRO section. Respondents were given the statement, as the school administrator, I feel that having an SRO at the school has the following impact on school climate. We are seeing a similar trend in 2020 that we saw in 2019. The overwhelming majority rank somewhat positive to positive, with positive scoring more than 50% in both years. So let's now go to the final slide of the presentation and transition to a question on SEL, on social emotional learning, and I'll complete the presentation here. We ask, are you using a social and emotional learning curriculum in your school? 37% responded yes, while 21% said yes, but they see improvement needed. So 58% of the respondents are using SEL curriculum in schools, with more than a quarter of the respondents saying that it's in development. While we'd like to see higher numbers for schools using SEL curriculum, we are optimistic and anticipate with the good work of this board and its staff, the school administrators, staff, teachers, will continue to make progress in this area. We are excited about the improvements and progress we've made to this point. And with that, Vice Chair Cummins, if there's time, and if there's any questions, I'm sure Christy and I'd be happy to respond to anything.
Board Member Lear.
Thank you. Yes, I did have a few questions, actually, and I'll just ask them sequentially. None of them are very long, I don't think, and won't interrupt to ask you if I can follow up, as long as that's okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
The first one is, was this a required survey? Was there anything, is funding connected to it? Did you put it to the LEAs as a requirement, or just casually?
It was not a required survey. There was nothing tied to it. It was all voluntary.
It maybe just a thought, it might be interesting in another year if it's, in order to get complete data, it would be interesting to hear from all charters, all district schools, because it would just give us a more complete picture. That's just a thought. I know sending required things is hard. Secondly, when I saw safety survey, I thought there would be helpful information, clear information about student incidents, guns in schools, assaults, there's nothing like that. So nothing like that is collected in concert with this survey. Is that right?
That is correct. We do have incident level data, as you're probably aware, board member, but that's not part of this. It's not part of this survey. Christy, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that if there's specific information that we're not necessarily, or that you feel we're not necessarily gathering from incident data, we could look at specific questions to add to the survey in this following spring, 2021, and get more of the perception of the school administrators, and then compare it to the actual incident data that we are receiving as well.
One person's opinion, I feel like if we're calling it a safety survey, it should give at least the board members, and of course these become public documents, but this should give board members a sense of not just, I think this is quite vague unless you add actual concerns and incidents of student behavior in it. And I think safety survey then kind of a misnomer. That's just, again, my opinion. And those are the questions I had. Thank you. That's just my suggestion going forward would be to tie together the physical safety, instead of having different sections in the office doing different kinds of information gathering. I think tying these together would be very informative for me. Thanks.
Thank you, board member.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions from board members. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.